going to do is something we did not do this morning, but I warned you all about. And that is looking at Islam from a historical perspective. We're now going to change gears and ask the hard questions. And these are the questions that aren't being asked, but need to be. And for most of you, this is the first time you've seen it. So don't look at me. Look at the screens. All right? There's about 86 slides we're going to go through. So just follow through it. Everything is on the screens, and we're going to zip through it, and I'm going to try to unpack it, and then I'm going to ask you 2 questions, but then I want you to throw questions at me if you have any problem. Don't take notes. You're not going to have time to take notes. We're going to go too fast. Just sit back and watch the screen. So the truth about Islam's origins. This is the newest polemic. This is the external polemic. This is the historical polemic that most of you have not heard about yet. Now, why? Why in the world are we doing historical polemics? Why are we even caring about that? Well, as I said earlier, there are 3 areas of polemics, 3 genres of polemics. One is the internal polemics. Now, polemics means going on the offense. That means we're confronting, we're engaging, we're actually asking difficult questions of Islam. Internal polemics is just looking at the Qur'an and reading it in the Qur'an that's in your hand in front of you. Looking at Muhammad and looking at his life. You're not asking whether or not he existed or not. You're looking and seeing what he did, what he said, and whether that's relevant for today. That's called internal polemics. That's what we've been doing for hundreds of years. That's what I did for most of my 40 years. For 30 years, I asked questions about Muhammad, and I asked questions about the Qur'an. And then I compared Muhammad to Jesus, and I compared the Qur'an to the Bible. That's the internal part. That's what you've all been told. That's what you've all been taught. That's the only thing you see on YouTube. That's the internal polemics. The second is the cultural polemics, where we go one step further and we ask, what is Islam doing today in the 21st century? What is it doing in Afghanistan, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in those countries that claim to be Islamic? Are they relevant? Are they working? And we're looking at the political setup. We're looking at the whole financial structure. We're looking at the social fabric of those countries. And we're seeing that they're decimating every one of these countries. And that's why so many of them are coming this direction. They want to come to the West. They want to come to America. They want to come to Europe. Why? Because something here that they don't have there. And that's the cultural mandate. And that's why we need to engage with that. So these 2 are very important, but they're the only 2 that we've ever been using. And the problem with these 2 kinds of polemics, it's that close to hate speech. And that's what people are calling Islamophobia. That's what people don't like. Because you're confronting not only the people, you're confronting the persons, but you're especially confronting the prophet. You don't touch Muhammad. There's a visceral hatred of anybody that says anything against Muhammad. Oh, you can confront the Quran. They're not going to say too much. You can confront Allah. But once you touch Muhammad, you saw what happened in the Muhammad cartoons. You saw what happened with the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. You die. You get killed. So no one wants to go down that route anymore. This is too dangerous. I did this for 30 years. I got beat up. I got my glasses broken. They tried to open up my throat. I got bloodied because of these 2 types of polemics. There is a third now, and that's what we're going to do tonight. The external polemics. This is the historical polemics. We're not even looking at the Quran. I'm not going to open up its pages and read it like I did this morning. I'm not going to be asking questions about what Muhammad did back then or whether or not Muhammad's relevant for today. I don't care diddly swat about those questions. I'm asking a much deeper question, a much more simple question. Did he exist? 3 words. Did he exist? Ooh, If he didn't exist, then why are we wasting our time talking about him? If he didn't exist, then who cares what he did here, there, or other? Who cares what he said if he didn't exist? Can you see, this is much more damaging. Now notice, this is not Islamophobia. This is not hate speech. It's a perfectly legitimate question. It's the same question that was asked of Jesus Christ in the 1800s. Did Jesus exist? They're still asking that today. Did he die on the cross? Did he rise again? Can we trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Can we trust our scriptures? These are normal questions. They're good questions. And we have answered every one of those questions. We're so far ahead of the game. Only Christianity has asked questions about its foundations. Only for 200 years have we been answering those questions about our foundations. Now we're asking the same questions about Islam. And don't stop with Islam. You also have to do the same thing with the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and the Vedas of Hinduism. You need to do with the Granth Sahib of the Sikhs. You need to do this with the Mormons. You need to do this with Jehovah's Witnesses. Any ism, any belief system that has a revelation and has a model that they follow, you can ask these questions of that I'm going to ask tonight. Are you ready? Okay, let's go ahead and let's see what we're going to find. So to do that, looking at external polemics, we're confronting the existence of the book, the man, and the place. That's what I call it, the book, the man, and the place. That's my words for it. It's very easy. It just drips out of your mouth. The book, the man, and the place. The book, the Qur'an, the man, Muhammad, and the place, Mecca. Those are the three things we're going to ask tonight. Confronting Mecca historically. Did it exist in the 7th century or before? Confronting Muhammad historically. Did he exist in the 7th century in Mecca and Medina? And confronting the Qur'an historically. Did it exist in the 7th century and has it been preserved perfectly for the last 1400 years? Conclusion, this form of polemics confronts the very foundations of Islam without confronting the people or their revelation or their prophet, and lowers the anger level. And that's why it's so easy, as you're going to find as you sit through tonight. Now, why the historical critique? Number one, everything we use tonight, everything I'm going to ask, comes from the 7th and 8th centuries. I'm not going to waste your time with the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. I let the Muslims deal with that. You're going to see why I say that in about 15 minutes. So therefore, everything we're going to find, everything that we're going to use has nothing to do with silence. I did a debate back in 1995 with Dr. Jabal Badawi, the world's leading authority at Cambridge University at that time. We did a debate in August of 1995, and I asked 10 historical questions about Islam, about Muhammad, and about the Quran. This is where I got started, that in 1995. Dr. Jamal Badawi, the world's leading authority, had never heard these questions before, but he turned to me at the end of the debate and he said, Mr. Smith, everything you're arguing from is from silence. But the absence of evidence doesn't prove the evidence of absence. And he was right. He hung me just on that one phrase. Just because there's no evidence doesn't mean it's not going to show up at some point or at some time. Well, they've been waiting 1400 years and they still haven't found it. But there he had me. That was in 1995. Watch what we now have today. And that's what we're going to do in the next hour and a half. Look at the evidence we have. No longer are we arguing from silence. And the absence of evidence is now on their foot. We've turned the whole thing completely on its head. No longer are we arguing from silence. They are arguing from silence. You have no idea what I'm talking about. Hold on. You'll see why as we go through. Secondly, it confronts the very foundations of Islam, the book and the man. Without the book, without the man, there is no Islam. If you don't have the Quran, you don't have Muhammad, what do you have left? Nothing. And we would say the same thing about Christianity. Without the Bible and Jesus Christ, what would we have left? Diddly swat. Nothing. We're just like them. We start from the same paradigm. They start with one book, we start with another book. They start with one man, we start with a better man. And that's why we need to confront those two. It's neutral. I mean, in other words, everything I'm going to use tonight, anybody could use. You don't have to be a Christian to use this material. But I'm going to have something to say about that at the very end. It doesn't attack Muslims, so it's not hate speech. It's politically correct. It's not Islamophobic. Now that I've been working on this, and I've been using this now for the last 10 years, but especially since COVID, for the last 4 years, I've been going so fast, so quick. We're getting so much new material. Some of the material I'm going to show tonight is the first time anybody's seen it. You're going to be the first to see it. That's how quick this is moving. It's going so quick. And that's why, folks, anybody could use it. But hold on a minute. I'm going to stymie that in just about another hour, but we'll wait for that. It's also easy to communicate. Everything, all the arguments are going to be on the screen. And if I give you the PowerPoint, and we're going to give it to you free, any of you want it, it's going to be on the computer up there. You can just go get it. Use this PowerPoint. It's for you. It's not for me. It's for everybody. More than that, we have the best and the only antidote. We're the only ones that have an answer to everything we're going to show tonight. Because while we shut down their book, their man in the place, we're the only ones that have a better book, a better man in a better place. We need to bring him home. We need to bring him home. Okay? And we're finding hundreds who are coming to Christ using this new polemics. We're looking for the Sauls who are becoming Pauls. These are the kind of converts we're getting. Because they come through propositional truth. Not because they've just been loved into the kingdom, but because they've been persuaded. So what does external polemics include? 4 areas, and we're going to cover these 4 areas tonight. First, we're going to start with the problem of the sources. Then we're going to go to the problem of Mecca. And then we're going to go to the problem with Muhammad. And we're going to go to the problem with the Qur'an, end with the Qur'an. You might say, hold on, am I just turning everything on its head? Yes, I have. It should be the book, the man, and the place, right? But I'm starting with the place, the man, and the book. Why am I going backwards? You'll see. There's a reason why I'm doing this. Watch the videos on Fander Films to see these arguments laid out in full, because we're going to go through very quickly tonight. These are much broader and much more in-depth on Fander Films on YouTube. And let's see quickly why each area is so potent for polemics. Now, this is what the Muslims say, and this is what every Muslim says, whether they are nominal or liberal or radical. Radical here on the right, the nominals in the middle, maybe not the liberals. Maybe I better hold off on the liberals. Liberals will not say this, but they only make up about 1% of all Muslims. It's the nominals and the radicals who say these things. Number one, that the Quran is the Word of God, has always been the Word of God, eternal Word of God, never been created. That Muhammad is the man that received the Quran, therefore he is the model for all of mankind, for all peoples, all places, in all times. And that Mecca is the place where it all happened. Mecca is where the place where Muhammad lived, where he received the Quran for the first 12 years of his life, before he went to Medina. Therefore, that book, that man, and that place are absolutely foundational for everything that Muslims believe. Since these 3 areas are foundational to Islam, we should therefore investigate them at the time they existed, at the 7th century. This is all happening in the 7th century, 600 AD, in the place they existed, in that central part of Arabia called the Hijaz, that's western central part of Arabia. So, let's review the problem of sources. Let's start with the sources and then move to Mecca. Why the sources? Because you want to know where it all comes from. Where does everything Muslims know today, where does it come from? Now, before that, let's look at a map. To understand that, you need to look at this map here. And I want to show you this right here. That brown area right there, that is where Islam began. According to Muslim standard Islamic narrative, according to Islam itself, what the Muslim scholars tell you, that brown area there, by 632, that was all that Islam controlled. When Muhammad died in 632, he was born in 570, started receiving revelations in 610, and for the next 22 years, by the time he died in 632, he controlled this brown area here, okay? Not very big, is it? But notice, it's in Western Arabia, middle and southern part of Arabia. Once he died in 632, then you have Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, the next 4 rightly guided caliphs. These are the caliphs that lived in Medina and did all their work in Medina, but they then expanded the borders, and that's called the Rashidun period, the period of the rightly guided caliph. And they expanded the borders into the orange area that you see there, from Afghanistan over here to Tripoli in the west, from Turkey down to Yemen in the south. Okay? There's Afghanistan, there's Tripoli, there's Turkey, and there's Yemen down here. That is the area they expanded to, the orange area. Then after these rightly guided caliphs, every one of them, 3 of them were killed, 1 died normally, and then you have the Battle of Siffin when Muawiyah comes to power, and he introduces and inaugurates the Umayyad dynasty. And the Umayyad dynasty went from 661 to 750, so from 661, that's the mid-7th century, up until the mid-8th century, you have the purple area here. That's what they expanded to. So from India in the east, all the way to Spain in the west, and then of course from the Yemen and Oman in the south up to Turkey in the north. That's the area that comes during the Umayyad dynasty. I'm not really interested in the purple area. I'm really only interested for tonight in the brown and the orange area. Can you memorize the map? Look at the map, get it in your mind. Don't look at me, look at the map. Try to memorize it. That's what I'm going to look at. We're going to look at the brown area and we're going to look at the orange area, because that is how Islam began, according to all the Islamic traditions. So let's look at a timeline. We need to see what they say. This is what the Islamic traditions, the standard Islamic narrative. Isn't that interesting? Standard Islamic narrative, S-I-N. What does that spell? Bingo, you got it. So according to Sin, this is what they tell us. Muhammad was born in 570. He started receiving the Quran when he moved. He was living there in Mecca, started receiving it in the Hira cave in 610. And then in 621, 11 years later, he was woken up in the middle of the night, went on back of a winged horse and flew up to Jerusalem, went right up to the seventh heavens and met Allah. And there Allah told him to pray 50 times a day. He came down to the fifth heaven, met Moses, who said, way too many prayers. See if you can get it back down again. So he bounces back and forth between the seventh and the fifth heaven, getting it from 50 prayers to 45, down to 30, down to 15, down to 5 prayers. Once he got it to 5 prayers, Moses says, go on back down to earth. So he comes back down to Jerusalem, gets back on the winged horse, and flies back down to Mecca. Now that's called the Miraj, and that's why the Dome of the Rock was built, right? That's why they built it there. Abdul Malik in 691 built the Dome of the Rock to commemorate the Miraj. One huge problem. There's nothing written about it on the Dome of the Rock. Not one word on all the inner ambulatories, which is the original part of the building. So what's the Dome of the Rock doing? We'll get to that. Hold on. Anyways, that's according to the standard Islamic narrative happens in 621. Then in 622, he then moves from Mecca, moves to Medina. It's called the Hijrah, with about 80 to 200 of his followers, and that begins the Islamic state. He now moves to Medina, takes over Medina, and from 622, he is the caliph until 632. And there in 630, he comes back to Mecca, takes over Mecca without firing a shot, and then in 632, he dies, poisoned by one of his wives. That's his life. So from 570 to 632. That's their story, not my story. That's everything you've heard. Now, after he dies, Abu Bakr takes over. He lasts for only 2 years before he dies naturally. In 634, he dies. Then Umar takes over and only lasts about 10 years. And then he is killed in 644, but he expands the borders quite a bit during his reign. And then when he is killed, Uthman takes over. He lasts only 12 years before he is killed. But while he is in power, in 652, he creates this book called the Qur'an. This is the book he creates. This is the book that comes from Uthman, according to Islam. 652, you'll hear that date again. And then when he is killed in 656, Ali, the adopted son of Muhammad, takes over. He only lasts 5 years before he is killed by Muawiyah at the Battle of Siffin in 661. There it is, folks. That's the timeline of the origins of Islam, according to the standard Islamic narrative. Therefore, the conclusion, Islam was fully formed in the Hijaz by 661. Within 40 years of Muhammad's death, everything was in place. So everything we need to know about how Islam began happened in the first 40 years. Have you heard any other story? No, that's the only story that's out there. Until tonight, that's everything you've been told. No, I'm just giving you the bare bones. I'm not giving you everything. We don't have time. I've got to get a plane. So let's continue on. Question, how do we know anything of the above? How do we know whether any of those events happened? Where did all these stories come from? Well, you would like to say it came from people who were actually there, right? Who actually saw these events happen, correct? We have that with Jesus, don't we? Matthew and John were right there, were they not? Watching Jesus. They were there for the last 3 years. Were they not eyewitness to everything they wrote and saw? Yeah. Of course they were. Mark and Luke got it from the eyewitnesses. So we have 2 eyewitnesses, and those who got it from the eyewitnesses who were actually in the same place, looking and see what Jesus said, looking and see what Jesus did, and they wrote down what he said and did. Right? You would expect the same thing for Islam. Certainly someone should have been there. So what do the Muslims tell us? What does Islam tell us? Who was there? You would hope eyewitnesses. Because we're only talking about 1,400 years ago, not 2,000 years ago, only 1,400 years ago. All right, let's see what the standard Islamic narrative tells us. And here we go. Standard Islamic says this. According to their traditions, this is what they say. Muhammad was dead by 632, right? So who wrote down his story? Well, that's known as the Siratul Rasulullah, which means the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, written down by whom? By this guy here, Ibn Ishaq. Look at his dates. It's hard to see, isn't it? You have to really look hard. I've done that purposely. You'll see why. He is the guy that wrote it down. But hold on a minute. Look at when he died, 765. Muhammad died in 632. Was he eyewitness to anything he saw? Absolutely not. But we have nothing from Ibn Ishaq. There's not one page of any book, of any manuscript written by him. So where do we get the biography of Muhammad, the Siratul Rasulullah? Where do we get it? We get it from this guy here, Ibn Hisham. He is the one that takes what Ibn Ishaq said, doesn't like a lot what he says, he throws it out and only retains what he wants, and that's the biography that we have in our hand today. And that's the one that all of you read, and that's the one I had to read. And then we also go to Al-Waqidi. He's the other one that has the battles of Muhammad. Those are the two men who write down the biography. But nothing comes from Ibn Ishaq. So what should we do with Ibn Ishaq? Let's just get rid of him. Goodbye, boom, and he's gone. That's why you can't see him. There's nothing written by him. It all comes from these two men. But look at their dates. 833, 835. Muhammad died in 632. Do your maths. Did these men know Muhammad? Did they see anything that Muhammad did? Did they hear anything Muhammad said? Hold on. What about what Muhammad said? To get to that, you need to go to a whole other genre called the hadith. You need to go to the sayings of Muhammad. And the first to write him down is a guy named Al-Bukhari, who died in 870. That's 240 years after the fact. And then you need to go to Sahih Muslim, 875. Al-Tirmidhi, 884. Ibn Majah, 887. Abu Dawud, 899. An-Nasai, 915. Now we're into the 10th century. Everything that Muhammad said was written by those who were living in the 9th and 10th century. That's 200 to 300 years too late. But we still have two other genres, folks. We have the tafsir and the tahriq. The tafsir are the commentaries that explain the Qur'an, and the tahriq are the histories of all of mankind. Where do they come from? The first to write them down is a guy named Al-Tabari, who died in 923. That's the 10th century. That's did I say 200 years? 300 years too late. Everything we know about Muhammad comes from 200 years and later. Now I want to just put this guy up here, Abdul Malik, because he is the first to actually introduce the word Muhammad. Did I say Muhammad or Muhammad? I said Muhammad, didn't I? Ooh, that's going to have a huge importance later on in our talk. But he is the first one that introduces that name. Now look, when he introduced it, he introduces it on the Dome of the Rock and on some coins in 691. Muhammad died in 632. This is 60 years after that time. But the people that actually give us the Muhammad of today, the people that actually we go to find out who Muhammad is, what he did, and what he said, are these people, the Abbasids, who come to power in around 750, 749 to be exact. That's the mid-8th century. Muhammad died in the early 7th century, so they're 150 years too late. Conclusion, Muhammad was revealed 84 years after the Abbasids created him, 141 years after he was first introduced, yet 201 years after he supposedly lived. These are all too late, much too late. These are not eyewitness accounts. Not 200 years, not 300 years after the fact. To be even more devastating, look and see where these men were living when they did this. Well, let's talk about the Islamic traditions themselves. According to what they tell us, they say that everything happened around those two green circles. That's Mecca and Medina. Those are the two cities where Muhammad lived. That's where the Quran was revealed, Mecca and Medina. Yet when you look at all of the writers, they did the writing in Baghdad, which is about 1,200 miles to the north. When you look at Ibn Hisham, he was born in Basra. He grew up in Cairo. He did his writing in Baghdad. Cairo is 990 miles away. Basra is 1,200 miles away, and so is Baghdad, way up to the north, nowhere near where he should have been to write down what Muhammad did or what Muhammad said. When you talk about Al-Bukhari, who is writing what Muhammad said, well, he was born in Bukhara, which is in Uzbekistan. That's 2,600 miles away. And our good friend Al-Tabari, who gives us the tafsir and the tahriq, he was living way up in Tabaristan, which is in northern Iran today. That's 1,700 miles away. Conclusion, none of the traditional writers lived or worked in Mecca or Medina. They were too far to the north of Mecca and came from the west and east of Baghdad. Note, these are all of these works originated from the Abbasid. These are all Abbasid writers from 750 AD and onwards. Now, if you want to look and see what we have, because we have the same genre in the Christianity, we have the Sirah of Jesus, the biography of Jesus, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, correct? That's the black letter part of the gospel account. We also have the hadith of Jesus. That would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written in red letters. Every time Jesus spoke, you write it in red letters, at least in my Bible. So there's the hadith of Jesus, right? We also have the tafsir of Jesus. That would be the commentaries of Paul's letters, who took what Jesus said and applied it to Ephesus and to Corinth and to Philippi. So we have also the tafsir of Jesus. And we also have the tahriq, which would be the history of the early church in the book of Acts. So we've got the exact same genre. But look and see when they were written. Everything we know that was written about the Sirah and the tafsir and the hadith and the tariq of Jesus, everything was written between 20 years after Christ's death up until 90 AD. Within 60 years of Christ's death, everything was written down. Written by those who were eyewitnesses to what they saw or heard it from the eyewitnesses. And they all lived where Jesus lived. Not hundreds of miles away, not thousands of miles away. So when you do a comparison between Christianity and Islam, just doing a comparison, when you look at the two, Christianity is written all of everything we know about Jesus Christ, his hadith, his tafsir, his tahqiq, and his sirah. Everything we know about what he said and what he did was written within 15 to 60 years of Christ's death, written by those who come from the same area. When you look at Islam, everything we know about Muhammad comes from 200 to 300 years later, hundreds of miles away. Which do you think is the more authoritative? Bingo. When you do a comparison, thank God we have the gospel accounts and we have Paul's letters. In fact, as a comparison, if we had to depend on sources for Jesus comparable to what Muslims are dependent on for Muhammad, Jesus would not begin to appear until the 3rd century. We would know nothing about Jesus until the 3rd century. Nothing. How would we defend him? We wouldn't be able to defend him. Now, I just got done telling you that the Sirah of Muhammad is written by a man named Ibn Hisham, and there is the Sirah right there, translated by Alfred Guillaume, but it says Siratu Rasulullah, written by Ibn Ishaq. Even there on the cover, it says Ibn Ishaq. But when you open up the introduction, it says very clearly that Ibn Ishaq had nothing to do with this. It was all written by Ibn Hisham. That's 9th century, right? That's 833, right? 200 years after the fact. Muhammad died in 632. This is 833. This is 200 years later. Did I not say that just 10 minutes ago? I lied. This was not written by Ibn Ishaq. This was not even written by Ibn Hisham. So who wrote this? We have nothing written by Ibn Hisham. There probably was never an Ibn Hisham. So then where does this come from? You can get it at any store. This is what I had to read when I was going through seminary. This is a book that everybody has to read to know who Muhammad was and what he did. That book, the Siratu Rasulullah, comes from this gentleman right here. His name was Heinrich Friedrich Wüstenfeld, who between 1858 and 1860, a German scholar in Arabic, went to 4 different German cities, went to all the libraries in those cities, and gleaned all the fragments he could find about this man named Muhammad, put it together into one form, and then published it in 1860. Folks, that's 160 years ago. There was nothing before the 1800s about Muhammad at all. So this is not Ibn Hisham from the 9th century. This is Wüstenfeld from the 19th century, 1,000 years later. Oh, don't stop there. I've been lying to you for the last 10 minutes. What about the other ones? The man who Muslims are dependent on to know who their prophet is or what he did is an elderly German linguist who wrote Muhammad's story 160 years ago, thus over 1,000 years too late. But folks, what about the other ones I've been talking about? You think the Sirah is bad enough? What about the other traditions that I put up there on the screen? So where are their extant manuscripts? Where is the first manuscripts for Sahih Muslim, for Al-Bukhari, Tirmidhi, Ibn Dawud? Where are they? Al-Tabari, all these guys that I've been putting up on the screen, we don't have any manuscripts from them at all. None from the 9th century. But didn't I just say 9th and 10th century? Boy, did I not know what was going on. And this is yet to go up on YouTube. You're one of the first to hear this. We've now found the earliest extant manuscripts for all of these writers. And none of them are from the 9th and 10th century. So where are they from? Let's look at Ibn Dawud, 10th century, that's 100 years later. Sahih Muslim, 11th century, that's 200 years later. Ibn Majah, 11th century, 200 years later. An-Nasai, 12th century, 300 years later. Jami al-Tirmidhi, 13th century, that's 400 years. Sahih Bukhari, the most important of all of the hadith traditions, the one that is Sahih means he is perfect, according to all Muslim, is from the 14th to the 15th century, that's 500 years later. You've never heard this before, have you? They have nothing before the 10th century. Not a thing. And most of them come from the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century, folks. That is the Ottoman period. All redacted back to a man named Al-Bukhari, back to someone named Ibn Hisham, back to someone named Al-Tabari. They're all redacted back. Well, what about the other traditions, which supposedly come from the 7th century? These are the ones the Muslims claim to be the companions of the Prophet himself. Let's see when they were written. Companions of Muhammad, all from the 7th century, according to Islam. The Muwatta comes straight from not Muhammad's time comes from the 9th century. That's 200 years later. The Sahifa al-Munabi, that comes from the 12th century. The Hanbal comes from the 13th century. So does the Musannaf of Abdul Razak from the 13th century. So does the Tadlisi from the 13th century. So what about Aimi Shaiba from the 13th century? Those are 600 years later. None of them are from the 7th century. See, this is yet to go up on YouTube. Even the world doesn't know about this yet, because no one's dared to go back and ask this question. We're the first to do so. Conclusion, these documents were all supposedly created in the 7th to 9th century, yet they do not begin to appear until the 9th to 15th century, thus from 100 to 600 years too late. This suggests that they were all written by others hundreds of years later. Consequently, they are all redacted attributions. None of them probably are true. There was no Ibn Hisham or Al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or Ibn Dawud. None of these guys existed. We don't have anything written by them. We only have attributions, much like we have in Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas. Did Thomas write the Gospel of Thomas? Absolutely not. That was written hundreds of years later. The Gospel of Barnabas. Did Barnabas write the Gospel of Barnabas? No, it was written in the 16th century, redacted back to Barnabas. These are nothing more than frauds. But see, nobody's dared go public with this. We're going public. The world needs to hear this. Islam sources of Islam are causing such a consternation that now the 21st century scholars are concerning, these are their conclusions, that Islam as we know it did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. The Qur'an probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years, as Muslims tell us, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. Conclusion, the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, that's 685 to 705 and before, is a later fabrication. It's a fraud. There's no other way to say it. Now, that's the problem of the sources. Now let's get to Mecca. Because Mecca is absolutely important. Without Mecca, everything else comes crashing down. We've got to look and see what's going on with Mecca.